Do you see the slides? Wonderful. So, okay, welcome everyone. I am Mattia Gianotti. I am one of the teaching assistants from this course of Hypermedia applications. And today we are going to discuss about the last two topics of the theoretical part about front-end. And these two topics are Bootstrap and accessibility. So in particular, today we are going to make a very, very small recap on media queries. Then we are going to discuss about the principle and basics of Bootstrap so that you can use it inside your projects. And then we are going to discuss about accessibility issues and how you can make your website accessible. And please remember that these two aspects are going to be going to be worth a lot of points inside your evaluation of the front end part of your exam. So it's actually something that is meaningful for you to count. So remember that we are still talking about front end, which means that we are not going to touch anything of what happens behind the scene in the server. We are just assuming that the informations come to us somehow, and we just want to know how to present them in a way that is better for the user, more intuitive, and in particular, as for today, that can be usable and readable by anyone and on any device. So also remember that when we talk about the basics of any web system, we are going to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, where HTML gives the information on the structure and on the content, CSS give the, in this way is better. Can you hear me better like this with the cameras switched off? Guys, give me a feedback. Do you hear me or you are... Okay, let's see if things get better. So remember, we have CSS that's going to give you the style, and JavaScript that is the part that is going to give you the interactivity and the possibility to modify the content on demand during the execution inside the browser. Do you remember from last lecture about CSS that in the last version of CSS, it is possible to enable media queries. And these queries are just functions that can be triggered and defining what is the kind of style that is going to be applied according to the dimension and the type of the device on which we are going to experience the web content. However, we have said that media queries are very hard to manage because there is a lot of complexities in writing them, a lot of difficulties in trying to...
So we have you seen in the here, and as I anticipated earlier, there is another tool that's called Value Proposition Canvas that's supposed to help you.
Yes, guys, there's someone please off the microphone. Guys. Guys, can you please switch off the microphone? I cannot make lectures like this. Okay, thank you very much. So, as I was saying, media query is a way that is very powerful to have content that can be shared on different medias without the need to rewrite the website altogether. However, can be very difficult. There are some tips that I provided you last time that are still going to be valid, so I will go a little bit in remembering you this stuff, but then for the first part of this lecture, we are going to see how you can make media queries in a much more efficient way so that you easier a lot your development process. First thing you need to take care is to use the viewport, to set up properly the viewport. And this means that you can set your browser so that it is able to scale properly the content. If you're not properly setting this viewport information like this, you just will not, your browser will not scale anything. So even if your content is responsive, actually your browser is not going to set it properly. Then we said you need to use relative measurements for the elements, such as using percentage or EM units whenever you can. Whereas the other two options, the other two tips that I used to set you are no more that important, because now, thanks to the increase of Bootstrap and the potential of Bootstrap to express inside, you will see that the largest part of this complexity is going to be neglected. So what it is Bootstrap? It is actually an open source tool and in particular CSS framework that you can use to have natively responsive websites. So Bootstrap is that is a plug and play solution. So you do not really need to download anything. You can just connect to Bootstrap from the online repository, and then you can use it without changing anything from inside. However, there are other ways in which you can do it, and we will deal with it in a very short moment. The other very interesting aspect of Bootstrap, and this is why Bootstrap has become the most used and well-known framework for CSS, is that it offers you a lot of predefined components that you can use by basically copy paste and then slightly define for your desires, and basically you can build up a lot of elements in your website almost for free. So you can see here there is a huge list of elements you may want to use inside Bootstrap. However, we are not going to see all of them today because there is no time for that. If you want, I leave you here the links to the official documentation where you can find all the informations for everything. So the first thing you need to understand is how you can create something using Bootstrap. And there are actually three options you can have to join Bootstrap. The first is to install Bootstrap through npm. And this is quite a solid solution. However, is not very much recommended because at the especially when they are going to create a newer version of Bootstrap, by downloading it, you may be not up to date with the latest version, and this means also that you may not be compliant with newer standards that instead is going to be defined by Bootstrap. So by using the other two, the second alternative, which is actually importing it directly from Bootstrap repository directly online, you are sure that you are always linked to the most up-to-date and the most bug-free version of the software. Remember that no matter what, you need to include both the CSS of Bootstrap, but also these three JavaScript codes, jQuery, Popper, and Bootstrap. And this is very important because using these three elements, Bootstrap is actually performing a lot of interactions that you really want to do, but you do not really want to program again because you're wasting a lot of time. So please remember to have all the three JavaScript imported properly. Last options that we are going to see later on in the slides how you can do it is to use a template or a theme. And this is an evolution of the first approach in the sense that you are still downloading the Bootstrap content, Bootstrap content. However, together with the basic libraries, you get also some material more that can be useful for you to start up your website. When you download anyway Bootstrap, you are going to see this kind of structure. And I just want to point you out that there are a lot of files and you just need to take care of them and to import properly them all. Actually, you can see that there is always a bootstrap.css and bootstrap.mean.css. These two actually offer the same capabilities, so it's exactly the same which one you want to import. It's just that the minified version of the code it's more optimized so that it is easier to load from the network, and it is very much suggested to do to use bootstrap.mean.css if you are going when you have to deliver the final version of your project. However, if you want to understand better how things work, you can use bootstrap.css, and in this way you can read better the code that has been provided to Bootstrap, so you can understand what's going on. The same things goes for the JavaScript, whereas this theme, a Bootstrap theme, is something that is not mandatory. It can be present if you download a theme, a Bootstrap theme, and it's a set of CSS rules already predefined for the theme, and we are going to see what's going inside there later on during the lecture. The final type of file is this .map file, and you can just forget about it. It's just a file that is being designed by Bootstrap to help the development tools inside not all but certain browsers to provide you with better support for Bootstrap. You do not need to import it. You do not need to have it or creating it for any reason at all for your project. Finally, you have this which may be present for downloading a theme, but it's not really mandatory. And we suggest you to use the SVG version of the icons, as we said in the last lecture about CSS, because the quality of the icons is much better than with the other type of files. However, if you are going for an old version or something that you think will be related to a legacy system that is not using HTML5 for any reason, you cannot use it, so you have to use the other formats, and that's why you have them inside the folder. This is, I'm presenting you here the basic structure of a Bootstrap web page. No matter what you want to achieve, when you start creating a web page with Bootstrap, you have a structure like this. And please take care of having always these two meta tags, the car set and the viewport, properly set so that you can have a proper interpretation of Bootstrap and the proper scaling of the web browser. you have to import the proper CSS and the proper JavaScript. And please remember that you have to add your own style after everything that is related to Bootstrap. And this is because since it's vertical, if you're going to place something before Bootstrap.css, the Bootstrap default style is going to override whatever you add. So this is something you do not really want to happen, and that's why we really want to stress out that you need to place them below. But now that we said this, how can you use in the end Bootstrap? And the first thing you need to take care is to add a container. A container is nothing but a div tag with the class container that is going to be the father of every responsive element inside your web page. In particular, everything that is going to be placed inside the Bootstrap grid that we're going to see in the next slide, which is going to be your most valuable allies inside the definition of the structure of your web page through Bootstrap, must be inside a container. And actually, there are three different options for the container. There is a standard container, which is set its maximum is set to be the maximum width of the screen. Can you hear me now? Guys, can you hear me? Okay. So I was saying that you can have basically three types of containers. The standard one, which is something that is equal to having a container for the phone device. Container fluid, which means that is going to be full scale no matter what is the screen. So I highly suggest you to use container fluid. Guys, if I go like this, you can hear me. Okay, I will try out without the microphone, using just the microphone of the computer. So I hope it's not that bad quality. So I was saying that container minus something is saying that you may have you may scale up to a certain point, but when you reach the size of the element you have set, so for example, which is the dimension of the mobile phone in portrait mode, he is going to be clumped and is going to be is going to use it as a maximum value. So it is better to have a container fluid, but for some specific cases, it may be useful to have different size of containers. However, for the scope of the project, I will highly suggest you to go for a container fluid, and that's all. Once you have a container, you may start placing things inside the Bootstrap grid. What is a Bootstrap grid? It's basically everything that is going to be responsible inside the web page, and it's going to be the element that is going to help you organizing things inside the web page. So as any grid is composed of rows and columns. However, the most important part are the columns. And this is because actually each row is independent from the other. So you can have a different number of columns in each row. You may want to align the columns and the rows in different way. However, remember that as for the alignment of the column, it happens only if you are not going to set the column to be occupying the whole line. So I will explain you in a moment, but you may decide that each column occupying a certain space inside the row. If you sum up the columns inside the row and you are not completing the row, you are going to use the align options. Otherwise, it's pointless. Whereas for the justify, so the alignment on the vertical axis inside the row, you need to take care that a row take the height of the highest element inside of it. So you may want to use the justify content class to align things on the vertical axis so that you can somehow have a better representation of the things inside the different elements of the row. But these two parameters are not very frequently used because in general you use the standard version. So in general you have full rows, so you do not use the align, and just in general try to have uniform elements inside the row. So how can you express how much space you want your column to fit? And there are actually two parameters you need to decide. The most important one is this epsilon parameter, which is an integer value between 1 and 12. And this is because the actual grid of Bootstrap is composed of 12 equally spread sections of the web page. So you can say that your column is going to occupy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 12 of these 12 spaces that Bootstrap is going to offer to you. And this is a mandatory parameter for the column. The second parameter instead, this X parameter, is something that is going to be used to determine under which devices, or better, under which screen size you're going to use that specific dimension. And the very important thing you need to take in consideration, as is something that is going to be happening throughout the whole experience you will have with Bootstrap, is that Bootstrap has been designed to be by default on smart screens, so in particular on the portrait mode of a smartphone, which means that in general a lot of behaviors that you will find odd inside Bootstrap comes out from this assumption. In particular here, the assumption is that if you are going to not specifying in which size you are going to use this number of columns, it is going to be considered to be inside the very smallest case possible. And remember that as for media queries, if your screen is not exactly the size of the media query you have set, it's going to check for the lowest breakpoint, for the closest breakpoint that is minor to the actual size of your screen. So let's go for a couple of examples. You can have, as we said, even or uneven number of columns, even one after the other. So you have, for example, in the first example, one row that is split equally in 3 pieces. Each one is column 4, so it's containing 4 out of 12 elements in Bootstrap. And this is a very common solution that is used, for example, when you need to create a list. So, for example, when you're going to create your group inside the project and you want to show the element inside the group, you are going probably to use this kind of approach. The second approach instead is an equal distribution of the column, with one that is small, 1/3 of the column, and one that is 2/3 of the row. And this approach is instead much common when you want to, for example, to highlight something. So you have an image and a quotation or a description of the image, and this is something that is very much used as a blueprint. However, as I said, you may play out differentiating between the different aspects according to the kind of view you are going to use. In this example, in the first row is composed of a column 12, which means the full length of the page. Sorry, the full width of the page. And since I've not specified the type, the breakpoint is going to happen on this phone view, whereas if I go on a larger device, I'm going to place to occupy only 2/3 of the line. And you see the effect here. So you have in the desktop view, the first row is composed of 2/3 by the first element and 1/3 in the last element. However, if I go on a phone view, which is the smaller size of the screen, the first element is going to occupy the full line, and the second one is going to go on the next line. These spaces here are actually the division between one row and the other, which means that if you are going over the 12 slots that you were assigned by Bootstrap, it is going to be a new line, but even still within this row aspect, which is something that is quite odd, and it's not going to very much appreciated in general. It seems like a mistake, and it's actually it is a mistake, because you should not get over the 12 columns. Just consider the last example instead. In this case, since I am not providing any different visualization for this approach, so I have column 6, no matter what, means that the screen, I'm going to apply these rules. It means that I'm going to use half the screen for each element. Even if I am on a larger screen, since I have not provided any additional rules to be applied, I'm still using it because it's still the closest breakpoint available inside this rule. Is it all clear? I mean, any doubt up to this moment? So let's start. Okay, what are breakpoints? Breakpoints are standard dimensions that have been fixed by Bootstrap to differentiate between the different size of the screens. So you have SM, which stands for small, of course, that is the phone in portrait mode. You have MD, which in general is the tablet, LG, which is large for the screens of the desktop, and XL, which is for the large displays. It's just a standard convention that Bootstrap is using to determine which is the actual size of the, which is like the actual standard size of the screen, which also means that, for example, in this case, this rule is going to be applied. So this col -MD -8 is going to be applied only in the case that I am inside a medium screen, whereas if I'm smaller than a medium screen, I'm going to apply this. If I'm on a large display, which is larger than MD, I'm still going to use this MD distribution because it's closer to large. Is it clearer? Okay, let me try again. You have, unfortunately, I cannot do anything about my connection today. It's very poor, but I don't know why. So, as I was saying, a breakpoint is a standard dimension, and this standard dimension is defined by Bootstrap, so you do not need to take care of it, and it's deciding is a set of standard measurements for something that is designed as a standard device. And you can say that if my device is at least large as this standard dimension, I'm going to use this set of rules. Otherwise, I have to search for other set of rules. So the tablet, which is in general a medium screen, but maybe small according to the producer, may be using the SM breakpoint, which because is not large enough to reach the standard dimension for a medium screen, or maybe it can use the medium screen if it's large enough. Or if it's a very big tablet, it also happens that sometimes it's going to use the large screen, which is the same as a full computer, because it is large enough to get out of the breakpoint. This time you were able to hear me? Okay. May I go on, or there are other questions? I assume I can go on since there are no questions in the chat. So, okay, maybe I will go a little bit faster in this, but not too fast. I just want to present some of the most used elements inside Bootstrap that you are going to use probably for the project of this course. And the first one is the carousel. The carousel is a slideshow, so it's something that you often see in almost every homepage of any website you visit. You have this slide of pictures going around, and this is made through a carousel. And you can see from the code, that the example code that I provided here, that is composed of a color carousel inner class in which you have the definition of whatever you are going to have inside all of the elements that are going to turn around inside the carousel. You have this active class here, which is the class that is going to be moved from one element to the other to determine which one is going to be actually visible inside the carousel at any time. And then you have two elements to link that is going to provide the features for the next and previous arrow here. So it's already all pre-made. You do not need to change anything except from this part here. So here you can change whatever you want because you want to modify the content inside the slide. If you are wondering what are these alt, data write, role, data slide, area hidden, SR only, there are some classes and attributes that have strange names. Do not bother for the moment. You will understand them at the end of this lecture because they are actually all elements that are made for the accessibility, because all Bootstrap elements are compliant with the accessibility rules by default. So you just have to take care of not overriding these attributes and parameters here, and it will be fine for the accessibility part on these elements. However, to understand them, we need to get to the end of this lecture. The drop-down is the only special element inside Bootstrap because it's not completely compliant with the accessibility rules. And this is because the Bootstrap drop-down button has been designed to be much more versatile with respect to the standard menus inside the accessibility classes that have been defined for the accessibility standards. So you just have to remember that when you have a drop-down, you need to take care by yourself of going for the area elements that we will see at the end of this lecture about accessibility. However, since area is not really that much of a hassle, the very complex part is going for the keyboard navigation patterns, and this is already provided by Bootstrap. So you do not need to take care of that part, which is very complex and very nasty, but you just need to remember to check for the compliance on the accessibility area roles. You will understand that, as I said at the end of this lecture, do not worry by now. The only other aspect that I want to let you is that drop-downs, as I said, as defined, keeping in mind that you are using them inside a smartphone, which means that actually the behavior of the drop-down to show the inner values inside of it happens only if you click on it. Instead, what happens is that you would like to have this behavior also on hover. So when I have the mouse over the button, this is not going to happen because actually in a smartphone, the over interaction is impossible to achieve. So this is why we are not using it in this way. If you want to have them, you have to rewrite some part of the Bootstrap JavaScript, which is something that I highly suggest you not to do. You can overcome this by using other tools such as the toggable elements inside the Bootstrap framework, or you may write them by scratch if you want to do really complex stuff. However, for the sake of this project, you can just, for the sake of the project of this course, you can just use drop-downs on click, and that's absolutely fine. Do not worry about it. Next element is navbar, and navbar is going to be one of the elements that you are going to use the most inside of your project, because it's actually the element that is going to offer you the possibility to create the header menu that you have in almost all websites. And unfortunately, it is also one of the most complex elements that you may have inside Bootstrap. So let me show you a very simple example of navigation bar, and you see that with respect to the other elements is just much more complex than all the others put together. So you may have different elements inside the navbar, and one is the brand, which actually is in general the image here, and this is often used to return to the homepage of the website. And sometimes, if you are, for example, in a dedicated sub-website, it's going to go back for the major website inside your navigation pattern. However, it's not that much interesting. Navigation navbar minus nav is actually the container. So this one here is the container of all the elements that are going to be interactable within the navigation menu as direct links. So this home link drop down disabled, search input bar and search button, all these things have to be not the form. Home link drop down and disable must all be put inside the navigation navbar minus nav element. Is the brand usually an SVG file or PNG? One is recommended. Actually, whenever you can, use SVG because the quality is much better. There is actually no rule, no explicit rule actually, because you can do whatever you want. It's just something that is used for quality reasons. So it's not a rule of thumb. Okay. Navbar togglers are the elements that you can that you use to define sub-menus. So you have, this is the major menu, and you can use a navbar toggle to create drop-down, which is actually collapsible element, so that you can open up and have other elements in this sub-menu here. If you do not want to use a drop-down, of course. If for some reasons, for example, you have multiple sub-menus, drop-downs are not going to work very well, so you may use togglers directly. Form inline is something to create this, for example, search bars here, the login button. So you have a small form here inside the system of the navigation bar. Navbar text is just for adding text. Navbar collapse is very interesting because it's a superclass that is going to be used to let you have this collapsible feature. So imagine to have this navigation bar here inside a smartphone. Inside a smartphone, if you align things like this, they are going to be too small to be interacted with. And if you're going to have them aligned vertically, it's just going to be too huge, and probably is going to block out the most part of the screen of the phone. We use this collapse.navbar minus collapse class to determine the elements that are going to be shown on view mode from this. So you have this three-line icon that is a button. When you click it, you show the panel here, and inside the panel you have only the elements that are inside the collapse navbar collapse class. Sorry. Is the navigation bar in the previous examples clear? Are in doubt? Because this is one of the most complex. If you understand how to use navigation bar, you basically can use anything inside Bootstrap. Okay, so toggler, one of you asked clarification about the distinction between drop-down and toggler. So a drop-down is actually a subtype of toggler. A toggler is any element that can be shrinked and collapsed. So something that I have an initial value, and then when I click over it, I can show more options to be chosen by. The drop-down is nothing but a specification of the toggler. Unfortunately, especially drop-down menus, do not fit well when you need to create sub menus. So if you want to add a drop-down inside an element of a drop-down menu, this is not really going to work very well, especially if you want them to work within this collapsible solution. So in this case, you may want to use natively a toggler. Actually, you can also use togglers, for example, to hide some part of the content. So something like click more to see, click here to see more, something like that. But inside the menu, you can use this navbar toggler to create something like a fake drop-down, so a less specific drop-down, and from this you can also create nested submenus with drop-down like style with a much more efficient and easy to go way. Is it clear or it's still foggy? Any other doubt, question, curiosity, whatever? Okay, I assume I can go on. So the last element I want to present to you from Bootstrap is the card. And this is because, especially when you are going to have to prepare a list of similar items, such as when you need to create a list to display a group, cards are very useful because they offer you already pre-made containers of content in a way that is very much easy to customize and to achieve. And also it's already pre-made, so you do not really need to make a lot of changes and stuff to create strange nested elements inside of it. So you have inside a card, you have an image, a title, text. This is the text, which is the description basically, a set of links, a set of items you can add, and links. And all of this is going to be packed inside a quite nice component you can place inside the page to create easily the list inside your web page. So I highly suggest you to go for these kind of solutions if you want to create groups showing a set of different elements inside of it that is going with a high probability to happen inside the project for this course. Now that we presented the major element of Bootstrap, it comes out a new question. What you remember that at the beginning I said you can use you can also use themes and templates to start up with Bootstrap. And the reason is that Bootstrap is going to offer you a set of startup, let's say, project from which you can begin your development to boost the evolution of the speed of the development of your website. And there are actually two different solutions. One is using a theme, And the theme is a fully designed startup website. So it's a already prepared website. You have everything in there, containing also specific already pre-made style to be fancy inside the content that has already been provided you. However, a theme is in general very hard to manage and to modify. So as for my opinion, it is better for you not to start from a theme, but to start from a template. The difference is that inside a template, you just have some structure of pages, but you do not have any style added over it. And this is very useful because it's very easy to customize. So you have already a pre-made structure of the web page, and you just need to modify a little bit to adjust so that you have all the elements you need, and then you can add whatever style you need without needing to worry of modifying what is already being placed inside. However, if you want to go for a theme, there is one thing you really need to know, and it is that themes use Sass. What is Sass? Sass is an extension of CSS that is providing you newer and much more efficient features to manage and maintain large-scale CSS. It's very much useful if you go for a very big website where you have hundreds of web pages with different styles, but is not very efficient, for example, for the goal of the project of this course, because the website is so small that is a waste of time, basically using the whole Sass capabilities. The other thing you need to remember is that no matter what you do, Sass is not going to be interpreted by the browser. No matter what, you need a pre-process that is called transpile to move from your Sass code inside standard CSS code. It's not very difficult. I leave you here. There is one line of terminal actually that can be inputted, or there are other fancy programs, GUI program, in which you can do it in a very easy way. However, you need to remember that this is something you should take care of because it's something that is not that easy to achieve. And what are these functionalities that has been added inside the Sass? And actually the important one are the first three elements. So the first one is definition of variables, which means you can define a name of something, and then you can reuse this name inside all the files you want, and then you can the value is going to be copy pasted inside of it. It's very useful, for example, if you define the variables as the color palette. In this way, when you need to change something inside the color palette, you just change once without the need to search for all the different CSS files, search for all the occurrences of that color, and then change it. Of course, you can override the variable values, but if you do it, it's very that you are misusing the variables, so it's not that a good idea. You can use nesting, which means that you are not required to remember all those fancy signs to define the relationship between the different items inside all the different items inside the hierarchical CSS structure. So the space, the plus, the cedilia, and all those fancy symbols that no one remembers ever. You can just use nesting, which means that I write a rule inside another one, and at the end, the compiler is going to modify this so that you can, so that is already preparing the proper symbols in between for you, so you do not need to worry about it. And the most important part is that you can import different files, which means that you can create very small and easy to manage SAS file describing, for example, one specific element that is going to be recurrent in different pages. And then when you need to create the style for that page, you just include all the elements that are going to be placed inside that page. In this way, you are much more efficient than creating everything from scratch every time, or importing everything all the time, which is also the other options that is going to be used inside the standard CSS. The last two functions are actually a variation of import in which you can include some properties of the classes, or you can copy paste some values from one style and then you add or modify them. So it's not that much of an interest in doing it. So when you need to customize your theme, create your own SAS file, you need to import the Bootstrap elements you want. You can then add whatever you want. And in the end, please remember to recompile everything. Otherwise, no matter what you've done, nothing is going to be seen inside your web page. I want to clearly state one thing. You are not required by any means inside this course to manage out SAS. So if you are not using, if you do not want to start from a theme, a Bootstrap theme, you can just forget everything about SAS from now on, because it's not mandatory, it's not required, and we are not going to evaluate differently if you have used SAS or not. It's just that if you want to start up with a theme, you are basically almost required to do it. And that's the only reason why I had to prepare to give you this very, very sum up version of the code. This is one of the advanced elements inside the web technologies that have been popped out inside last year and latest years. So we are not going to go too much inside of it, and that's the farthest we go actually inside of it. If you have any doubts, please ask them now. Otherwise, we are going for a completely different topic, and we will just forget about all this stuff for the moment. Okay, one of your colleagues said that for the responsive part, I know that the maximum number is 12. I assume the maximum number of columns I can occupy is 12. And then we have the breaking points, but I really don't understand how to state them with the minus. So let me go back here. Okay. So you have always to write something like call minus one of the values from the breakpoint, which means XS, SM, MD, or LG, a number from 1 to 12. This is how you define the column. What does it mean? It means that it takes the column, it is a column, it's going to occupy 1, 2, 3, no, the value you set here in the epsilon value of those 12, let's say, columns you have inside the Bootstrap grid. And then you can choose, I apply this dimension or not. And to decide if I need to apply it, I need to use the breakpoint. I use the breakpoint. I search if I am the closest breakpoint among the different classes that I have stated like this. So if I have one div that has more than one class, such as like here, this col -6, col -md -4. I said, okay, I take the column, I search for, I can use a dimension that is half the width or 1/3 of the width. Now, which one should I choose? I should choose the one that is closest, is actually the one that is the from the actual size of my screen. So suppose I am on a desktop. My desktop is a full HD screen, so has a width of 1980 pixels. Which one is closer, AMD or XS? AMD is more or less 1000 pixels. XS is 400 pixels. The one that is closer is AMD, so I basically cancel out this one and consider only this dimension here. Is it clearer or is still okay? Any other question, doubt? So the options are just separated by a blank space. Yes, you have to put a blank space between the different definition of the columns. Each time you have a blank space, it's like a new line. It is mandatory to use Bootstrap? No. You can use standard CSS and that's fine. But if you want to have a responsive website, it's extremely highly suggested to use Bootstrap. Okay. I assume there are no other questions, so we'll start the last topic of the lecture, which is accessibility. And to start with this aspect, I want to give you a very important quotation, I think, from Tim Berners-Lee, which, as most of you know, is considered the inventor of the World Wide Web. And he said that the power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. Why do we need to bother about accessibility and disability? And the reason is that actually disability comes in many different forms. And when we want to have something that is available for everyone, we need to take care that everyone can actually use our website or any other tool we want to create. This is not something that is related just to our websites, but for the sake of this course, we are just going to focus on these aspects. And remember that, especially with disabilities, it's very hard that one disability alone is shown. Many times, actually most of the times, disabilities comes in couple or triple or even more than three together. So it may be important to define and how to do things for them. But why should we bother from an economical point of view, let's say? Because theoretically, everything can be made easy to achieve and whatever, but it costs money. So why do I need to invest money in making content that is accessible by anyone? And the reason, on a purely economical way, is that a huge part of the population in the world has at least one disability. So, for example, let's imagine to have to create a website from your optometrist. You need to sell glasses. Probably probably the largest part of the customers that are going to visit your website actually has disabilities in the sight aspect. Maybe they're not completely blind, but for sure they're going to have disabilities regarding the visual aspects. And if you make your website so that they cannot see the content clearly, actually there are two options. Or they left your website for one of the of your let's say for someone else that gives them a larger possibility to improve and to get the content of their website, or you are just losing a lot of quality inside the perception of your clients, which is not good either. For all these reasons, there has been founded this Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI. And as we said, it's not just a matter of researchers that want to be good in the eyes of the culture, of the cultural people or whatever. It's something that makes money, and that's also why this initiative has been sponsored very much by a lot of government and industries. So, for example, US the government, Canadian government, European Union, and major industries such as IBM, Microsoft, SAP. So basically, all the top league companies working inside providing web content on work actually support and push forward to have more accessible websites. By the way, in the US, for example, there has been a law stating that if your website is not enough accessible, so accessibility comes with a grid of certificate of quality that is AA or AAA. If your website is for specific fields, such as, for example, public use, and the website is not AAA, it's forbidden for you to publish your website as it is. You have to be compliant with AAA quality indicated by this Web Accessibility Initiative, which is not that easy to achieve. So depending also on the kind of website that you want to create, this may be quite interesting, and also maybe quite the difference between getting paid for the work you've done and have to redo everything again. So what are these principles that have been defined? So we said that we have an initiative. What they have done, they've created these poor principles. That are just 4 major elements. For each of these elements, there are a huge set actually, of possible alternatives and things you need to consider. The first is perceivable. It means basically that no matter what is your disability, you need to be able to get the content of your website. Or in the other way around, I, as a designer of the website, I mean, not designer as a study title, I need to create the content in my website so that blind, deaf, people with, that are not able to move their hands, all of them can move throughout my website and obtain those information. The website must be operable. It means that no matter what is my disability, I need to be able to move through the content of my website and access, input, navigate through the links of it. It must be understandable, which means that the user interface actually is not something about the content of the website, but actually the way I present the content must be understandable by anyone. And the system must be robust so that it can be used by a huge variety of different assistive technologies, for example. And the most common ones are actually automatic speakers, for example, that are special browsers that read the web page for blind people, for example. As I said, I'm not going to describe all the principles that you need to take care of, because there are really a lot of them, and some of them are really trivial. But I want to point out some of the most interesting and key aspects, especially because are those that we are going to take care in the evaluation of your project. So, for example, text alternatives. If you have an image inside your website and you want your website to be accessible by a blind people, you cannot force them to learn to be able to see the image. You need to provide something which is a text description of the image, so that the blind people, the blind person, is able to get the same content of the image without actually seeing it. And this is also very important, for example, if you have audios or video, for example, to have subtitles and other options that you may use, and so on and so forth. Another very important aspect is the use of color. The color is not just visual fancy. Of course, I do not need to say this to designers, but for engineers, please remember that color is not just fancy. Color must have a meaning and must give the possibility to provide some information more, for example, on classification or on highlighting something. So use the color carefully and with colors that actually can be seen clearly. Resize the text. This is actually very trivial, because you say, okay, text can always be resized. Actually, the point is not resizing the text, but resizing it, being sure that there is no loss of content. What does it mean? It means that if I scale my text, but you have set that the content, the container in which you have the text, can be at maximum of 700 pixels, and I scale up the text and this get out of it, and I'm going to truncate the text, I'm losing a part of the content, and this is not acceptable. So you need to take care also of this stuff. As I said, you need to be able to provide a way to people to access the content of your website even without a mouse, because for any reason people may not be able to move a mouse on the table, but maybe they can use a button because they cannot move the hands, they just have one finger to press the button, or they can use the gaze. In both cases, we actually translate the interaction with a keyboard, so that you need to be sure that the user can navigate throughout your website using a keyboard. Actually, the reason why also Bootstrap has all those elements inside of it and classes that you will not really understand how they work, is that they ensure for you, no matter what you've done, if you do not change the structure of those tags, that people can use them through the keyboard. So basically, the tab key of the keyboard. So it's something that Bootstrap already offers you, but if you're not using Bootstrap, you need to take care of it. Of course, the system must be readable. The content you want to show must be readable, and it must be predictable. So it's a bad idea if something happens out of chance and anytime in different pages you have the same things to be done in a different way. So please try to keep in mind to have a standardized set of behaviors, and in this way also the aesthetic of the interactable element may help you convey the meaning that the behavior of that thing is exactly the same of the behavior of the other things that has the same aspect. Last but not least, please take care of having input assistant, or given said in another way, please be careful that you have a way of tracking what the user has input, and then to provide him help on, in case he made a mistake, on how to correct it. And then robust. Robust actually comes almost for free since we are using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, because most of the things are already there. But actually, there is one element that is very important, and this is the last name role value element. It means we need to provide, for example, synthetic voice readers from web pages information so that they can help people understand, in particular, what they need to input inside specific input fields. So it's an aid for people on how to being able to understand what they really need to add inside the web page as an input. And the solution is using ARIA. ARIA actually stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications Suite. Since the name is terrible, we just use ARIA, and no matter what. And I want to make you I think one of the clearest example ever. Suppose you want to get the information of the phone number of your user, and you have this form basically. You are saying that this form is providing a definition that is can be given by the definition of this line, which is the descriptor of the group, which is actually saying, give me the phone number, the work phone number. Then I have 3 input texts. If I see them, it's automatic for me to understand what I need to add: the country code, the area code, and the subscriber code. But if you are blind and they ask you to input something, you do not know that actually you need to input your number inside 3 different steps. So, for example, to avoid the user to make a mistake, you can create 3 different input texts and then let the system tell the user that in the first input text he has to input a number that is the country code, which are just the first 2 numbers of your international numbers. It's the number of this, actually the number of the state your number is registered to. For Italian, for example, is 39. Then, when the user has input this number, the automatic reader is going for this input and saying, okay, now you have to input a number, and this number must be the area code, which is, for example, the number of the operator, the first 3 numbers of your phone number. And when the user has input this, he's going to be asked by the automatic reader to input another number, which is the subscriber number. In this way, you have guided the user to insert the right number in any of these field in a very easy and clear way. I leave you here at the end of these slides the list of different resource material that you can use to really better understand how area elements work, because it's actually very interesting, but it can be very, very complex. If you are not so much interested in going so much in deep on area, just go for the last one, where you have the Google platform for developers describing you how to really make them in an easy way. So the first three are actually the real definition and the official documentation on how area should be done. The last one is the how can you make it inside your web page. Just for the sake of it, I just want to provide you the 4 most common examples of ARIA labels. And the first is, of course, ARIA label, which means that you are providing a text to specify the meaning of whatever you want to, of the tag you are specifying now. Label by is a reference saying that my element is actually defined, is actually labeled by something else. And this something else is the ID of another HTML element, no matter what it is. ARIA owns is it's not very much used. It's just for the submenus to say that I am defined by being contextualized by something else. So I need to be taken into account when I have to go for that other element. And finally, the described by is the dual form of descriptions given by the label by item. Is there any doubt? I know that it's not easy at all, but if you have any doubt now, I can try to solve them. Otherwise, I will show you how you can manage out the accessibility part for the exam. And that will be the end of the lecture. And then I will stay here for all your doubts, no matter what. Okay, one of your colleagues asked, why should I use the area labeled by and the described by? Okay, it's actually a way of saying it really depends, because the reader, the automatic reader specifically, for example, is trying to give a description for each tag you have. But if the description of my tag is something that is inside another tag, I cannot do it. For example, let's go to the example before. Here, you see that this group of element is labeled by this span. And the reason is that if you read this tag, there is no actual content inside of it. So I cannot describe it because I do not have anything as pure text content. Whereas this span is easily described by its text, work font. So I say that this group is labeled by this text. So you are using a reference. And the described by is actually exactly the same. So instead of using a label, you are just using the description, which means because the label is actually go for the label inside inside the tag, or in case there is no tag, no label inside of here, use the inner content. The described by is just going for the inner content. Okay. Okay, so let's go with the last topic of the lecture in these last 4 minutes, and then I will stay connected in case you have any other doubt. So how can you actually manage inside the project for this course to get accessibility? And there are actually two possible solutions. One is to do manual check, which is extremely complex and you should not do it, or you can use an automatic test tool. And the automatic test tool we suggest is to use Wave. This is a plugin that works only for Chrome, unfortunately, for the moment, but it is very powerful, and I will show you in the next slides how you can use it. So first thing, you need to download the extension for Chrome. Then you go to your website. In this case, for an example, I decide to use the homepage of the Polyme website. When you open the extension, it's going to present you this kind of structure. And what is going to happen is that you will see some measurement on how good your website is. And then inside the web page, throughout all these icons, you can see if they are good or not. Where are all these elements, and what does those means? What I really want to point out is that we are just going, for the sake of the exam, to check errors and contrast errors. We are not going to check alerts, features, structural, and ARIA. So just focus on those two elements. However, to get the top score, this must be 0 in all the web pages of your website. Now, suppose you have these errors. How can you solve them? And you can go for these panels here, the detail and the contrast panel. In the detail panel, you can see the different icons and description of what is the actual error here. Whereas in the contrast, you see the two different colors of the text in the background in general, and if they are good or bad. And you must be at least AA in both normal and large text to be accessible. If you get AAA, it's the best, but of course it's not always that easy. Then by clicking on each of these icons, you will be moved inside the web page to the element that has this to which this icon is referring to, and then by clicking on it, you can get a more clear description on what you need to change and why is this an error. So it's very easy to use, and we expect you that in the project you will be able to manage out so that there are no errors and no contrast error throughout all your web pages. So that's all for today's lecture. I will stay here in case you have doubts, but for the moment it's all. Thank you all for attending this class, and sorry for the problems with the audio. I will try my best to fix them by tomorrow. By the way, tomorrow is going to be a hands-on lecture where we are going to put together all the different contents from the front-end technology part without yet the connection to the database. So please attend with a code editor for web content at hand.